Hey, thanks for tuning in. Martin Gansten has joined me today to talk about his new publication, which is almost 1.5 months old, so not still really new, but still new considering the context, which is called the Jewel of Annual Astrology, 16th or 17th century text composed by Balabhadra somewhere in South or Central India. Thanks, Martin, for joining. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you. Just quickly to correct that, the text was actually composed in Rajmahal, which is in the present-day state of Jharkhand, so right on the western of West Bengal, so
cool.
Northeast.
So that was India. A bit upper, right? Yeah. So let's just start talking about. You already wrote 2 papers that are related to Tajika and origins of Tajika, but what kind of drove you to kind of do such a huge academic work in terms of translating and presenting a critical edition? So I think it would be worthwhile talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, what led me to Balabhadra's text, I mean, I began to take an interest in Tajika a long time ago, more actively about 10 years ago. At that time, like everyone else, I looked first of all at Nilakantha's work, the Tajika Nilakanthi. But what eventually drew me to the Hāyanaratna is that it's such a big text. And it contains quotations from so many different works, Tajika works, which were composed over more than 400 years. So as a historian, you can, if you read this text, you can see the development of Tajika doctrine and various aspects of Tajika doctrine over the centuries. So that makes the book a valuable one. There was another part to your question, I think. Sorry, I forgot exactly what it was you asked. What drew me to the...
the motivation to kind of do this research work.
Oh, yes. Excuse me. Yes, yeah, you mentioned critical edition. Right. I when I set out to do this, I didn't actually intend to make a critical edition.
Okay.
Because I had some text witnesses, some editions of the text, and I naively thought that, well, this looks like a fairly well preserved text. I can just, basically translate it as it is. And then I got some more text witnesses, and I found that no, they did differ, quite substantially in places. And eventually I realized if I'm going to do this properly, I'm going to have to do a critical edition. But I didn't want to abandon the translation project.
Okay.
So rather than just switching from doing a translation to doing a critical edition, I did both, which meant that I was meant to be doing this part-time over 3 years, and it pretty much took up all my time, or any time that I wasn't teaching, I was doing this, and it still took considerably longer time than the 3 years.
I think everyone should be thankful to you for taking up. It's not a dual thing, but it's almost 3 or 4 things combined together at one time. So it was one of the most, it's one of the most extensive Sanskrit texts and a complete text that one can probably read. So thank you so much.
It is a big text.
Yes,
it is. And I was grappling with this question of how to give the Sanskrit text. I wanted to do a parallel edition so that you have the original text on the left-hand side and the translation on the right-hand side, which is a very good way of learning, or at least not of learning a language, but a very good way of, once you've learned the basics, of actually getting better at the improving your skills in the language. And I was grappling with the question of whether to give the Sanskrit text in the Devanagari or transliterated, Roman transliteration. Eventually I went for the Roman transliteration, which I know that many Indian readers find more cumbersome, more difficult to read, because it seems unnatural to read an Indian language in Roman script.
Yeah.
And it's the same for me whenever I go to India. I mean, I read Devanagari script, but I still find it odd to see English words spelled out in Devanagari. So I can understand the double take that you need to do to process it, but I still went for the Roman transliteration because I wanted it to be possible. For
actually, you don't give the Devanagari, right?
It's not, the Devanagari is not given in the book itself, no. But
I don't know from where I remember reading Devanagari in some of the things. Yeah,
I think perhaps I sent you something that I
okay
that I put in Devanagari script.
Yeah, but that's okay. Yes.
Yeah.
But I just kind of remember reading Devanagari somewhere very close to your book itself. So, yeah, okay.
Okay. Well, the point is, two things I wanted to say. The first is that I went for the Roman transliteration because I wanted this to be accessible to some extent for historians of astrology who don't read Sanskrit but would be interested in finding the parallel words and expressions in the Sanskrit text. So it's not a book that is intended solely for Indian readers or for readers who already know Sanskrit, but for anyone who's interested in the history of astrology. So that's why I went for that. But the thing about the book is, as I'm sure you intended to mention, it's open access.
Yeah.
So it's freely available. And it's actually, there are different degrees of open access, as of course you know, and this is so open that anyone is actually legally free to take the transliterated text and convert it to Devanagari, which can be done more or less automatically these days, using computer programs or even online applications, and convert it into Devanagari text. So if you want the Devanagari text, it's technically possible to get it. You just need a little bit of tech savvy to get it.
Okay, so something that kind of always struck me is some of those mistakes that happened in Tajika, and but still Indian astrologers kind of maintained those errors for around 700 to 800 years. I think you would always go back to origins of Tajika with Samarasimha. So, but I'm not sure how much of Samarasimha's text actually exists. So, some of the latest works that we had, in line with how Balabhadra has presented his works, was in line with Neelakanti's text, Tajika Neelakanti. So, did you think he had access to Neelakanta's text as well, while Balabhadra was composing.
Did Balabhadra have
Yeah,
access to Nilakantha's text?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. He was, and he quotes extensively from it.
Yeah.
I mean, he quotes, I think, several hundred shlokas.
So there is no other possibility to kind of have quoted except for having, you know, the text itself. So
no, and Balabhadra was the student of Nilakantha's younger brother. So he had a very close family connection with Nilakantha. So there was no difficulty for Balabhadra in having access to. Not only did he have access to Nilakantha's text, he had access to Nilakantha's own brother, who presumably studied Tajika with Nilakantha. So, but he also had a lot of other texts, including Samarasingha's work, which is now mostly lost. I mean, Samarasingha wrote. Apparently wrote something which was simply known as Tajika Shastra or Samarasingha Shastra, which consisted of 3 parts, and that text is now lost. So we just have quotations in other texts.
okay. So and one more important thing is, like, we have to kind of talk about transmission of these texts from Persia to India, and I think Islamic Empire made its way into India sometime by 9th or 10th century, if I'm not wrong, but I'm not sure how much of astrological texts kind of got transmitted during the early days of Islamic entry into India. But over a period of time, at around 12th century, I think, by the time Mughals had made their way into India, I think it must have been probably through the early Mughal rulers, or who were in the middle range of Mughal dynasty in the northern part of India. So, and I think you also presented one more paper associating Tajika texts with Saul ibn Bishar's. So that's one of the most. Do you think Saul was probably the single most authority on Indian texts, or were there some other? Because Abu Mashar also kind of, it's difficult to kind of read any annual astrology without having the idea of Abu Mashar in our mind. So especially someone who is exposed to the annual astrological techniques of Abu Mashar, which was recently translated by Ben Dykes about a year ago. So what were possibly some of the source texts for Tajika, which because it's easier to kind of find out, because Saul was probably one of those, but it's difficult to zero in on Abu Mashar, because primary directions was one of the important techniques that Abu Mashar used, and the distributor or the promiser was one of the most important time lord that Abu Mashar used in his book of solar revolutions. But Indians did not practice primary directions, and there is no evidence of that technique in Indian astrology at any point of time, and not even now. So it kind of, there is a lot of speculation that's going on here. So
okay, so that's several interlinked questions there. Just a brief note first on the transmission. I don't think that the transmission of Arabic astronomy and astrology, that is Arabic language texts, necessarily came with, or I don't think they did come with Muslim armies or rulers. I mean, typically, soldiers don't carry
astrological texts
with them. So what we have to remember is that Persia was Persia was invaded by or came under Muslim rule already in the mid 7th century, I think 651. And from the 7th century itself, there were 7th or 8th century, there were trade contacts between Muslims, Persian Muslims, who obviously had access to Arabic language texts on various subjects, and India. That is especially Saurashtra, the Saurashtra area of present-day Gujarat. So there was frequent sea trade going on in these areas. And in that part of India, trade and coinage and things like that were largely dominated by Jains. So the Jains especially had these early contacts, peaceful contacts mostly, with Muslim traders. And much of the traditions of Arabic language learning came that way. So they passed into India in a peaceful way through the Jains, and Brahmin authors writing in Sanskrit picked up on this slightly later and seem to have got it from the Jains. So the Jains were sort of middlemen between the Muslims and the Brahmins. So some of the earliest authors we get on Tajika in Sanskrit seem to have been either Jains, like the Hemaprabha Suri, who wrote what was possibly the oldest preserved text on Tajika in Sanskrit, the Trailokya Prakasha. He was Jain. Samarasingha, we mentioned already. He doesn't seem to have been a Jain, but he did belong to the community called Pragvata. Today they're called Purvad, which are composed both of Hindus and of Jains. So it's a merchant community. It's a merchant community mixed Jain-Hindu. Now Balabhadra, when he writes about Samarasingha, he calls him a Brahmin, which is not true. It's historically not correct, because Samarasingha calls himself a Pragvata, and the Pragvatas are not Brahmins. But it's possible that Balabhadra actually believed that Samarasingha was a Brahmin.
But Balabhadra was himself a Brahmin, right?
He was a Brahmin, but he lived in Eastern India. It's probable, not sure, but probable that he was born in Varanasi, and he, as I said, he lived in Rajmahal in present-day Jharkhand. So what was then the province of Bengal, the Mughal province of Bengal. So he was in the east, and he may not have known these different jatis that were in the west. So he probably believed that Samarasingha was a Brahmin. Anyway, so that was one point I wanted to make, that this transmission was made it's not contemporaneous with the Muslim dynasties taking over, but it's by peaceful trade contacts. Then you asked about Sahel and Abu Ma'ashar and the possible Arabic language sources.
But before you answer that, let's kind of make one more speculation. I think during the Mughal rule at probably around 12th century through to the 17th century, until the death of Aurangzeb, there was I kind of had a notion, or I was believing in the notion that Parsi was the language used for communication, whatever it may be, like oral or written, and Parsi was one of the official languages of all the Mughal courts in India, and Arabic language was used only for religious texts. I'm not sure if Muslims treated astrology as a religious text, because by then they had actually banished astrology calling it as a black magic or something like that. So I'm not sure if Indians translated a lot of texts from Arabic, or they actually translated it from Parsi, because most of the contemporary astrologers at that particular point of time in Indian courts would have been more proficient in Parsi language than the Arabic language, because Arabic was not part of Indian communal setup at that particular point of time. So I'm not sure if this makes sense or if this is historically correct or something like that. But I was thinking that Parsi was the most important language for official communication and intellectual exchanges.
No, you're absolutely right, especially during the Mughal period, which is about from circa 1200. Circa 1200 to 1500. You have the Delhi Sultanate, and then you get the Mughal rule from circa 1500 up to the 1800s. 1800s. But so Persian or Parsi was a very important cultural language, and it became, as you say, the official court language in the Mughal Empire. But this early stage of transmission of Tajika and the writing of the earliest Tajika texts in Sanskrit seems to have taken place in the 13th century. And in the 13th century, circa mid 13th century Gujarat, it was still under Hindu rule. So there was still no Muslim rule, and Persian was not an official language. I'm sure that a lot of Persian was spoken because there were these trade contacts. And you can see in the Arabic terminology that is used, the astrological terminology, you can see that in some of these words, the way they have been naturalized in Sanskrit, you can see that there's a Persian pronunciation underlying it. You can see this is an Arabic word, but it's Arabic as pronounced by a Persian. You see? Yeah. So what Balabhadra actually says in his book, he says Samarasingha translated this from the Persian language. He says this explicitly, Parsya Bhashya.
Oh, okay. I should have missed it probably, yeah.
But we have to ask ourselves, Balabhadra lived, as I said, he was a Brahmin from East India who lived about 400 years later than Samarasingha. And he lived at the court of a Mughal ruler where Persian was spoken. Did Balabhadra have a conception of Arabic as a distinct language from Persian? Or was it all Persian to him? I think it's probably he just thought it was all Persian, you know? He didn't make this distinction.
That's what I was thinking.
But by the time that Samarasingha made his translation in the 1200s, there were no, as far as we know, there were no astrological compendia in Persian. Even the Persians wrote and read Arabic. Arabic was the scholarly language of Muslim Persia.
Yeah, sure.
I was just going to say, we do know, David Pingree wrote back in the late 1990s, he wrote that we don't actually know what these Tajika source texts were and whether they were written in Arabic or in Persian. So he sort of left it open. But I've been able to identify many of these sources, and they're all Arabic language sources.
Okay.
So my My belief is that there was a compendium of texts, and this was something that was done quite often. You collected bits and pieces from different astrological authors, and you put them together in one volume, sort of like an anthology. And and I think that that is the text that Samarasingha had access to. There were bits of Sahel, bits of Abu Ma'ashar, bits of Omar, and so on. But he believed them to have been written by one author. And that's why he never mentions all these names. He just mentions one name, which is Kindi.
Al-Kindi.
Yeah, I think he says Kindi or Kindika. But I think it's pretty certain that this is Al-Kindi, the polymath author.
Okay. So I think that pretty much answers about what Sahel bin Bishr or Abu Mashar or something like that. So Al-Kindi is probably the source text, and with amalgamation of little bit of other texts as well. And do we know why primary directions did not make its way into India? Because I think it would have been a great value addition, and it's a shame that primary directions really got missed from Tajika. Yeah.
Well, we know very little about basically. Horoscopic astrology has come in two waves into the Indian peninsula, and we have the transmission from the Greek language area, and about that we don't know which text or texts were used and so on, but or why certain techniques made it and others didn't. We know considerably more about the Tajika transmission, which is much later in time, and the source texts used there. And actually, if you read, Samarasingha wrote this work that is now lost, that I mentioned, but he also wrote one work that has survived, which I believe he wrote that at a somewhat later stage. Perhaps he got hold of new sources, so he wrote sort of addendum and an extra work, which is completely about natal astrology. So it's the Karma Prakasha, also known as Manushya Jataka. Now we still have this text. Again, I believe, I can't prove, but I believe that what we have is actually missing some chapters. Because he uses this very common strategy of presenting his material in accordance with the various houses of the horoscope, So first house matters, second house matters, and so on. So he mentions body and health, that's the first house, right? Money matters, that's the second house. Siblings, third house. Parents, fourth house. And then he says nothing about children. He says nothing about marriage, and so on. These things that would have come in several of the following houses. And so I think probably there are parts of this book that have been lost as well. But he does mention primary directions. Only he very briefly, and he doesn't understand them.
I think there is that problem is it's there everywhere, but in terms of Triplicity lords, I think there was some confusion with regards to sect as well. And I assumed, my understanding is that they kind of confused with the Kalabala, which was presented by Parashara. So, and they did not probably put sect into best use as much as they should have. So that's one thing that I was thinking about. And I think it will be interesting to kind of talk about the one specific thing that you mentioned, like conflicting opinions in the calculation of the lot of fortune. Shams are one of those gray areas as well, because uh, uh, without the understanding of sect in a reasonable manner, it probably becomes difficult to work with the lots or shams. So I did not go through all the lots because I prefer to follow the Persian or Hellenistic way, and I did not go through a lot of things, but there are specific reversals and non-reversals which happens in Hellenistic and medieval astrology, and the reversal happens for the lot of fortune and lot of spirit, for sure. But does Indian authors kind of follow the same thing? Because modern day Indian authors do not understand sect at all. So there is no differentiation itself, and they just follow this open single calculation of distance between the sun and the moon, and adding the same from the ascendant as the lot of fortune or the point of fortune. So it's probably technically wrong. So did you think Indians had a better understanding of it, or they should have had even more, greater depth in understanding sect?
Now, the phenomenon of reversing calculations by night, it's, as you say, it's not done even in the Greek texts or the Arabic language texts. It's not done for all lots, but for most of them.
Yeah.
For most of them, it's a case that if you were born in the daytime, you calculated one way, and if you were born at night, you calculated the other way around. And that reversal, day-night reversal, is present in Tajika texts. It's there in Samarasingha, and it's still there in Balabhadra's work. So that part is still given. It's in Nila. It's in the Tajika Nilakantha as well. So if
I think there are close to 50 shams.
Yes.
I mean, it's understandable because Persia is the source of all the texts, and Persians kind of manufacture lots out of nowhere. So
again, famously, Al-Biruni wrote in the, I think, the 11th century that it's not possible to give a complete list of the sounds or the lots because new ones are invented every day. So, but no, if you're saying that modern day astrologers in India are not using this reversal, day-night reversal, then that is contrary not just to Arabic or Greco-Arabic tradition, but it's actually contrary to the Tajika Nilakantha. But the controversy surrounding the calculation is that is mentioned by Balabhadra is another one, and it's to do with it's a bit technical, and it's easier to, I think, to read that chapter of the book. After all, it's free; anyone can read it. Than to try to explain it in a podcast, but
sure.
Without diagrams and things. But it's to do with two different ways of describing the same calculation. But Balabhadra takes it as two different kinds of calculations to be practiced in two different sets of circumstances.
Okay.
And that is an area that was a matter of contention in his day. You can see that he's arguing against some people who are proposing to read things in one way, and is defending the other way of reading it. So there was some difference of opinion even in the 17th century.
Okay.
and possibly earlier.
Okay. So apart from that, there was a very difficult chapter as far as I see was the one on configurations of planets. You know, let me just.
Tajika yogas.
The yogas, you know, I may not say it exactly. The 16 configurations, yeah. It was one of the most difficult chapters to kind of wrap my head through, and I just had to run through it. And I don't even remember more than just one or two, you know, configurations by name. So that was probably one of the most complicated things. So, but I don't know how far we can utilize all of these things, or how far we can, you know, look at all of these things with a lot of presence of mind while doing charts. But I think it's really, you know, extremely valuable. And I also think that you went in reasonable detail in the, you know, chat with Chris that you did. So maybe we can just, you know, skip that area. We have already spoke about the shams, and ruler of the year kind of becomes really difficult when it comes to Tajika, because they have a lot of, you know, that's one of those reasons why I kind of felt Tajika is a bit difficult, and I follow the Persian method, because there is only one lord of the year, which is the perfected sign of the year. Interestingly, annual perfections made its way into India in form of Munta. But earlier there is Sudarshana Chakra, where we have the Lagna, Surya Lagna and Chandra Lagna, from where we perfect for each year and you know, find out the results. But interestingly, perfections made its way into India through annual predictive methods, and I think there is no real difference between the Hellenistic astrologers did perfections and Indian astrologers are doing perfections from a basic you know, perfections point of view, because Valence did a lot more with perfections, but Indians just use it in a basic level, calling it as munta, and they use it as a point and just perfect it each and every year to the subsequent signs starting from the ascendant. So that is, and they also give the conditions of munta and how to predict based upon Munda's condition and the Lord of the Year, I mean the ruler of Munda's condition. But apart from that, Lord of the Year, we have Shams, we take into account Shams and Trirashipati, and there is a lot of, you know, never-ending list that comes. So
well, it's not never ending. It's 5 possible candidates.
No, but I mean it's
yeah, and they all the different authors, Tajika authors, have slightly different takes on how to rate these different candidates and you know, choose. So it's very similar to the Heilig process in
but the criteria, even though it's just 5, the criteria has kind of always confused me. So
yeah. And you know, the interesting thing to me as a historian of astrology is, where did this come from? Because
yeah,
if you look at these criteria, they're not. I mean, it's not Indian. It's not Indian astrology. I mean, it's not classical Indian astrology. It's not that they're saying, well, use the Navamsha Lord or you know, something that is obviously from the Sanskrit tradition. But they're using things that are obviously from the Tajik tradition, like you said, Trirashipati, that is the triplicity ruler, or the ruler of the sect light, for instance, the sun by day or the moon by night. And so it looks as though this more complex system of determining the ruler of the year actually has a Persian or Perso-Arabic origin. But I've never seen it in any Arabic language text, because as you say, those texts always just go for the domicile ruler of the perfected descendant or the munta.
Yeah, I mean, but the point I was trying to make is like the criteria is how out of, you know, using which we kind of find the lot of the area. As you mentioned, it's just 5, and the 5 is, I think, pretty much there in Tajika Nilakanti as well, and yeah, so it's not changing. But when it comes to the alternate ruler of the year or alternate indicator of the year, Abu Mashar, kind of, it's it's very difficult to even remember all those. So considering that, it's okay, but how do we arrive at the Lord of the Year in terms of Indian Tajika system? It's a bit complex, and I hope there is a simpler way to kind of doing it. So it's better to kind of stick to the one single Lord of the Year, which is the profected sign of the year, and from there we can just make our way through our charts.
Well, we can see that even in Tajika texts you have this distinction between the Muntesha and the Varshesha.
Yeah.
So the ruler of the Munta and the ruler of the year.
Yeah.
Then they can be the same. They're not necessarily the same.
Yes.
But even when the Muntesha is different from the Varshesha, the Muntesha is still
essentially the Lord of the Year.
It's still an important planet. So I think at the very least, just keeping an eye on that planet would be, everyone would agree that is something you should do. Could we just back the tape a little bit? Because I wanted to say something about the Tajika yogas.
Yeah, sure.
Which you sort of skipped over.
No, sure, we can talk about it.
But I just want to say that it looks more complex than it is, perhaps. And
okay.
And it was, especially with this misunderstanding of what is known in Arabic as Kabul, which became Kambula in Sanskrit. That particular, which means in Arabic, it means reception. So that concept was misunderstood, and it became something very complex, which takes up a lot of the third chapter of the Hāyanaratna. But right near the end, as I remember, this is from memory, but I think near the end of the third chapter, Balabhadra actually quotes an earlier author, Yadava Suri, who says that just as Vishnu has 24 different forms, depending on, Vishnu in his four hands holds the conch and the wheel and the lotus and the club or mace. Right? So, and depending on the order in which these four items are placed, you get these 24 upavyuhas, Keshava, Narayana, Madhava, Govinda, and so on.
Yeah.
That is part of Vaishnava doctrine. Okay,
yes.
So Yadava makes this this comparison. It says just as all these are just different forms of the same Vishnu, so all these different yogas are just variations on the single idea of application.
Yeah, I think you mentioned in one of the footnotes, I just found it, where Yadava Suri is part of Arabic root of Shem. So I think it's around page number 350 to 355 or something like that. Mm-hmm. So thanks for mentioning that. And yeah, I mean, the entire chapter of the 16 configurations needs 2 or 3 readings to kind of, get a hold, especially with the name. Even though I come from the same tradition, it's difficult for me to kind of remember the names. So, Tri Rashipati, or the Triplicity Lords. So I think that's where we made a real scribal transmission error, or error in understanding the ideology of Triplicity Lords. So, but unfortunately, still no one has, taken on to correct those things. But I think I just have a theory which I cannot prove as to why Indians made a mistake. I think it comes from the Dorothian triplicity. Maybe I can just share the screen and So these are the triplicities where we have you know, first triplicity, second triplicity, and the participating triplicity lords. These are the Dorothean triplicity rulership schemes. And day ruler, night ruler, and participating ruler for diurnal, and same goes here. Where so, but the problem here is like I think Indians kind of took the day ruler and night ruler for each sign and just left the participating ruler and assigned those participating rulers for the last four signs.
Yes.
Where, yeah, so I think actually I should give this credit to Rok Koritnik, my friend from Slovenia. When we are talking about triplicity large, I think he was the one who pointed out this error to me, until which I did not realize something like this had happened in Tajika. So do you think this is a valid consideration in terms of how Indian astrologers made a error in understanding
something along those lines? I remember this is a big book I've been translating, right? Yes. and over a number of years. So I don't remember each detail with crystal clarity, but I do remember when working with this, noticing this sort of pattern that this is how it must have happened. But if we want to some extent, I did go into these things in one of my papers, which is entitled I always forget the titles of my own papers. It's the origins of goodness. Let me have a look.
I can. Is it Samarsimha, an early transmission of?
No,
Tajika?
No, it's not
okay.
the one. It's not the one. I'll find it. Just give me a second. It's Origins of the Tajika system of astrological aspects and dignities. That's it.
Okay.
So it's also an open access paper published in the History of Science in South Asia. So you can just go to their website and search for my name, and you'll find this paper among others. Origins of the Tajika system of astrological aspects and dignities. So one of the dignities that I mention in this paper is the triplicities, and it has this. Actually, I believe that decans and triplicities were confused twice.
Okay.
They were confused both in the early transmission of astrology from the Greek-speaking areas into India, and then again with the transmission of Tajika. Because if you look at the classical Indian system of Drikana, Deccan rulerships, they actually follow the triplicities. You know, the decans of Aries, for instance, are assigned to Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. Right? So Mars, Sun, and Jupiter.
Yeah.
Which, of course, are the signs belonging to a single triplicity. And it's the same pattern throughout the other signs. So I think at a very early stage, these two divisions by three, the decans are where you divide a sign into three parts. And the triplicities are collections of three signs.
Sure.
And I think those were confused and conflated. And then you get a second layer of confusion on top of that with the Tajika transmission. So you actually get at least two different Tajika systems of triplicities, so, which they try to.
This is one of the sad part of Tajika and still it's kind of pertaining. No one has really rectified it. And apart from that, we have the daily, regular solar revolutions and daily revolutions and monthly revolutions, which is where I think you made a commentary on primary directions, if I'm not wrong. So that is one thing, but I was not sure if there was much difference in the way, there is a lot of difference because there is this Hadda. Do you want to talk about this Hadda periods?
Sure.
Yeah.
So Hadda is another one of these Sanskritized Arabic terms, had, which means boundary or so what we call the terms in astrology. That is these unequal divisions of a sign into 5 parts ruled by the 5 planets, not the sun and moon, but the other 5. So in the Tajika tradition, as presented by Balabhadra, these haddas or terms are used to give different, to divide a year into different periods. And you can use it also to subdivide a month or to subdivide a day.
I think, yes, please go on.
No,
I was just going to, I wanted to say about Hadda, but the reason why I did not say is like, it's almost again second level of confusion where, because the bounds or terms are Indian, the Indian equivalent is the Trimshamshas. So again, here it's called as Haddas, and here it's put into a different use, and Trimshamshas are again put into a different use. And Trimshamshas, Indians kind of draw a regular divisional chart, and still there is Cancer and Leo, which someone was kind of arguing on social media, like it cannot be that way, because there is no rulership for sun and moon, or assignment of rulership for sun and moon in the unequal 5 divisions, which are called as terms or haddas. So in Tajika, it's almost similar to the confusion of the Deccans itself. So that's something that I wanted to bring up. So it's difficult for me to kind of leave without talking about the haddas.
Well, just as an aside, this isn't really the topic under discussion, but I do think it would be useful to look at, if we're just talking about Indian astrology generally. Indian astrology has changed quite a lot over the past 200 years or so, because of social changes. People who do astrology in India today are generally not members of traditional Jyotishi families. They're not traditionally it would be, you were an astrologer because your father was an astrologer and his father was an astrologer, and you were taught these things in family tradition, and you were taught in a certain way, using particular texts and so on, particular commentaries on those texts. That's all. I shouldn't say it's gone, but that's not the way astrology is typically practiced in India today. If you look up an astrologer in the yellow pages or whatever, whatever you Google trying to find astrologer Chennai,
I guarantee that my name won't be there.
Most of the people you'll find listed will not be members of traditional Jyotishi families going back for centuries.
That's true.
They will be people who are, who have other day jobs. Most of them. They will be,
or the retired people who kind of take up astrology after their retirement, and
right, exactly. So they will have started doing astrology as a hobby. And some of them may read Sanskrit, and some of them may not. Some may read a little bit, but not enough really to actually to study the original texts without translation. But they will have learned astrology, by reading translations, English translations, or Hindi or Tamil or whatever translations of texts, and modern books. So it's a different landscape than it was for so many centuries. And I think that some of the things that are common practice in Indian astrology today that people take for granted may not be older than, say, 100 to 150 years. Like everyone always using the Vimshottari Dasha, for instance. Or for that instance, the way they use Vargas, that drawing a separate divisional chart for the Trimshansha. I would like to know what is the earliest known example of that? Can you find an instance of that prior to the 20th century?
That's what I'm saying. It's the pollution of the modern authors who kind of made up a lot of things, which is why I don't recommend reading any modern authors, especially when it comes to Jyotish. So it's a sad story.
It's not. I don't want to be one of those people who say everything that is modern is bad. I mean, already Kalidasa in the 6th century, he has a line. I don't remember which of his works, but in one of his works there is a line saying, "Puranamit yevana sadhu sarvam." Not everything old is good, or not everything is good simply because it's old. Puranamit yevana sadhu sarvam, and that is true, of course, and the opposite is also true, which would be the modern Western idea that everything that is new is good. So, but the actually things that are good,
Yeah, but especially when it comes to Vargas is what I'm pointing out, where people make up. See, most of the problem is like in any book, footnotes and bibliography are really important, because that is one of the establishments where we know that author is kind of quoting or is drawing from some older or classical source. But it's very rare that modern Indian books have footnotes or bibliography or citations. So that is one of the problems where people are making up theories, especially when it comes to this Trimshamsha. And this understanding probably goes back, as you said, everything old is not good. So Tajika is from 16th or 17th century, and the problem really started from there itself when it comes to decans and bounds. So yeah,
I feel I should say that, since you said Indian books don't generally have footnotes, I mean, most Western astrology books don't have footnotes either.
Oh, okay, but so my only exposure is to traditional texts, and most of the traditional texts,
So people like myself, or Ben Dykes, or Chris Brennan for that matter, we will have to varying extents academic backgrounds, right? And so that's one of the things that you're really that you're trained in. If you have an academic background, especially in the humanities, you learn how to make proper citations and to back things up. If you claim something, you have to back it up. You have to give a source. So if you read Ben Dykes' translations, or if you read Chris Brennan's book on Hellenistic astrology, and if you read my books and papers, you will find footnotes or endnotes. It's not necessarily the case, if you buy any sort of Western book on astrology, that it will be well researched and with proper citations.
Sure, that's yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So and regarding what came and what did not come, I think it's funny that Indians kind of implemented the Hellenistic classical aspect doctrine, and they managed to call it as Tajika aspects. In modern day astrology, they call it as Tajika aspects. But there is no real usage of a square or a trine or something like that in regular Parashari or Parashari Jyotish. But there is special aspects. It's not that the square aspects or trine aspects are completely ignored. Most of the square aspects or trine aspects are part of yogas, as I think, because Indians found it as yogas and kind of attached the special aspects to the Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn. But when it comes to Tajika, they managed to kind of stick to the classical Hellenistic doctrine of aspects, and they called it as Tajika aspects. And I'm sure so many people practicing Tajika are still religiously following the Tajika aspects and in the chart, and they don't kind of forego that particular thing. So that's one thing which kind of stuck with Tajika.
Yes. Some of the things that didn't enter India before did come with the Tajika system. So, as you say, the aspect system is one of those doctrines, and then other things, didn't survive. As we mentioned, directions, primary directions. There is a fleeting mention of them in the Karma Prakasha, and then it's sort of misunderstood and mixed up with the Firdaria, the Fardar, and then it's sort of just peters out, disappears. So it's clear that there wasn't. I think probably Samarasingha had to translate these texts without a lot of practical guidance.
Okay.
I don't think he had an actual astrology teacher who showed him this is how we do, this is how we use this technique, but he just had to sort of try to learn it from a book. And I think all of us have this experience. We try to learn things from books, and you can to some extent, but then
Yeah, I can understand. Yeah. And that's probably one of those reasons why primary directions was not really a big part of Indian astrology. It didn't even make its way into Indian astrology. So that's quite understandable. So
and it's a shame, because it's not that, I mean, primary directions is it's a mathematically sophisticated and demanding technique, you can say. You need to be able to calculate to do spherical trigonometry, but it's not that Indians didn't do that. I mean,
yeah, that's the point.
India had a very sophisticated mathematic tradition. So it's not that, it's just that the astrologers, Samarasingha would have needed either a practicing Arabic astrologer to show him what they actually did, or he would have needed a good maths teacher, an Indian maths teacher, explaining to him, no, this is what it must mean. This must be the idea.
Yeah, because it's funny, because India had Aryabhatta in 5th century and Bhaskara at around 11th century. And not that we did not have mathematicians during the other centuries, but still, those are two pioneers who kind of contributed to the development of century or even beyond. So now at this point we can't do much about it. So I just wish that it was part of Indian tradition itself. So yeah.
Well, it's not too late. just, you have to reintroduce it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's very much possible, but I'm not sure how much interest that people would take in doing something like that. So, but I think that's pretty much all about what I wanted to talk about, because there was a lot that you covered in Chris Brennan's interview, and I just wanted to do that what was not covered in it. So I think it's important for people to kind of watch that as well before they watch this, because it's probably the other end of it. So yeah, that pretty much, I put the links to the open access source, and I hope everyone finds this text of great use, because it's one of the most valuable texts. And yeah, thank you so much for doing this. And
Thank you.
Yeah. And everyone, I mean, most of the people know that you're working on the next book on annual predictive techniques, and we hope that it's published soon. Which
I hope so too. No, it's. I mean, the book is done. The book is done. It's with the publisher, and it's. I think the final chapter is being typeset at the moment.
Excellent.
So it should be out this autumn. Yeah.
Anytime soon. Great. Yeah. So thank you so much for all the hard work, and this is surely a great contribution. And I myself have a lot to read, because I just ran through because of lack of time, and I just realized a little bit of things that I missed midway. So again, thank you so much for joining, and I hope we'll do another video when your next book comes out.
Gladly.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.